She moved through the opulent halls of the Finch estate like a whisper, a shadow in the gilded cage, her name Sarah, her presence barely acknowledged by those who basked in its splendor. For years, she had polished silver that reflected faces twisted with arrogance, vacuumed carpets that muffled the sounds of cruel laughter, and tended to rooms that echoed with emptiness, particularly the grand suite of Mr. Alastair Finch, the reclusive patriarch. It was a life of quiet dignity amidst overt disdain, a constant barrage of subtle and not-so-subtle reminders from Julian Finch, Alastair's only son and heir apparent, that she was less, insignificant, a fixture to be ignored or, worse, derided. Julian, a man sculpted from privilege and disdain, whose voice dripped with condescension, never missed an opportunity to remind Sarah of her station. "Do try to be invisible, Sarah," he'd sneer, his eyes, cold as ancient coins, raking over her simple uniform. "It's what you're paid for." After all, the injustice was a daily bread, swallowed with the quiet resilience that had become her armor. She saw the loneliness in old Mr. Finch's eyes, a silent sorrow that mirrored her own feelings of being unseen, unheard. He was a man drowning in his own wealth, neglected by the very son who stood to inherit it all. One rainy Tuesday evening, the storm outside a mere reflection of the brewing tempest within the mansion's cold stone walls, Sarah found Mr. Alastair Finch not in his bed, nor in his study, but slumped precariously on a chaise lounge in the deserted conservatory, a half-empty bottle of brandy beside him, his gaze lost in the rain-streaked glass. He wasn't merely drunk, a profound weariness clung to him, a disorientation that spoke more of a deep-seated despair or encroaching illness than simple intoxication. He mumbled incoherently, his usually sharp eyes clouded with confusion. Julian was, as usual, absent, likely entertaining his sycophantic friends in the city, squandering the fortune he so eagerly awaited. Sarah approached him, not as a maid to a master, but as one human being to another in distress. "Mr. Finch, sir," she said softly, her voice a balm in the cavernous room. "Let me help you to your room. It's late, and you need your rest." He looked up, a flicker of recognition in his clouded eyes, a ghost of a grateful smile. With gentle strength, she supported his frail frame, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors, his occasional stumbled steps a heavy counterpoint to her steady presence. Julian, returning unexpectedly, caught the tail end of this scene at the doorway of his father's suite. He didn't offer to help. Instead, a contemptuous smirk spread across his perfectly sculpted face. Well, what have we here?" he drawled, his voice laced with venom. "Father, consorting with the staff now?" "And you, Sarah," he spat, his gaze dismissive, "stick to dusting. You're hardly qualified for nursing duties, especially not for a man of his stature." He made a grand, mocking gesture. Sarah simply met his gaze, her own steady and unreadable, before settling Mr. Finch into his bed, ensuring he was comfortable, offering a glass of water which he weakly accepted, his fingers briefly, tremulously, brushing hers in a silent thank you. The old man's eyes, for a fleeting moment, held a profound clarity, a deep, sorrowful understanding. Sarah merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a shared, unspoken burden, before retreating from the room, Julian's cruel, dismissive laughter echoing behind her. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this small act of compassion, so natural to her, would somehow be twisted, used against her or her ailing employer by the man who saw decency as weakness and kindness as an opportunity for scorn. The air in the Finch mansion grew heavier in the days that followed, thick with unspoken anxieties and the palpable avarice of Julian Finch. If you've ever felt the sting of being underestimated, of your quiet work being dismissed while louder, emptier voices claim all the attention, then you understand the world Sarah inhabited. But what happens when the quietest voice holds the key to the loudest truth? Stay with us, for this tale of humility and hubris is far from over. The news of Mr. Alastair Finch's passing, a fortnight after that rain-soaked evening, descended upon the mansion with a somber, inevitable weight. Julian, however, navigated the corridors with an ill-concealed spring in his step, his grief a meticulously crafted performance for the benefit of distant relatives and business associates. He draped himself in expensive black, his pronouncements of sorrow sounding hollow even to his own ears, his mind already cataloguing the assets, the properties, the sheer, intoxicating volume of wealth that would soon be his. Sarah continued her duties, her movements precise, her face a mask of composed sorrow, though hers was genuine, a quiet mourning for the lonely old man who had shown her small, almost imperceptible kindnesses. Julian, in his newfound unofficial reign, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in asserting his dominance over her, his commands sharper, his disdain more pronounced. "Sarah," he barked one morning, finding a speck of imaginary dust on a mahogany table, "one might think with father gone, you'd actually try to earn your keep. This is a billionaire's residence, not a hovel. Do you understand the difference, girl?" He leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee and self-importance. "Once the formalities are over, there will be changes." Significant changes. His eyes glinted with a malicious promise, and Sarah understood. Her position, already tenuous, was now hanging by the thinnest of threads, dependent on the whim of a man who despised her very existence. She endured it all with her characteristic stoicism, her inner world a fortress against his petty tyrannies. The day of the will reading arrived, a day Julian had anticipated with an almost feverish excitement. He pictured himself, magnanimous in his victory, perhaps even bestowing a pittance upon the staff, a grand gesture from the new lord of the manor. He sat in the grand library, surrounded by a few carefully chosen associates and the family lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face was as dry and parchment-like as the documents he carried. Julian lounged in his father's high-backed leather chair, a portrait of smug entitlement, a shark circling its prey. He adjusted his silk tie, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Sarah was not present, of course. Why would she be? She was, in Julian's mind, less than the furniture, a ghost in the machine of his inheritance. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. "We are gathered," he began, his voice a monotone, "to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Alastair Harrington Finch." Julian leaned forward, a greedy smile playing on his lips. He nodded encouragingly at Abernathy, as if to say, "Get on with it, man, deliver me my kingdom." The lawyer meticulously read through the usual preamble, the bequests to distant cousins, the charitable donations to established institutions, all minor, expected. Julian drummed his fingers impatiently on the polished wood of the desk. He could almost taste the champagne, feel the steering wheel of a new sports car, and vision the fawning admiration of his circle. He imagined the headlines: "Julian Finch, philanthropic scion, takes the helm." The world was his oyster, and he was ready to pry it open with the diamond-encrusted tool of his father's fortune. Mr. Abernathy paused, peering over his spectacles at Julian, then at the document, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. "And now," he continued, his voice taking on a slightly more resonant tone, "we come to the primary beneficiary, the inheritor of the residual estate, including all properties, shares, and liquid assets." Julian puffed his chest, his smile widening, a conqueror awaiting his laurels. The air crackled with his anticipation. Mr. Abernathy took a deliberate breath, the silence in the library stretching taut, vibrating with Julian's unspoken avarice. "The residual estate," the lawyer declared, his voice suddenly ringing with an unexpected clarity, "valued at approximately $950 million, is bequeathed in its entirety to Miss Sarah Walker." The name dropped into the opulent room like a lead weight, shattering the crystal illusion of Julian's future. For a moment, there was only a stunned, echoing silence, so profound that the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to thunder. Julian's smug expression froze, then slowly contorted, his jaw slackening, his eyes wide with utter, uncomprehending disbelief. Visual cue, close up on Julian's face, the color draining from it, eyes bulging in shock. He blinked, once, twice, as if trying to clear a monstrous apparition from his sight. "What?" he finally choked out, the word a strangled croak. "What did you say?" "There must be some mistake. A clerical error." "Walker? Sarah Walker? The maid?" His voice rose with each syllable, cracking with incredulity and dawning fury. Mr. Abernathy calmly met his gaze. "There is no mistake, Mr. Finch. The will is quite explicit, signed by your father, witnessed, and notarized. Miss Sarah Walker is the sole inheritor of the Finch estate." Julian leaped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the polished floor. "This is preposterous. Absurd. She manipulated him. The old man was senile, clearly. She's a charlatan, a gold digger, a common thief who preyed on a vulnerable, sick old man. His face was now a mask of crimson rage, spittle flying from his lips as he gestured wildly. Visual cue, close-up on Sarah, who has been quietly summoned by Mr. Abernathy and stands by the doorway, her expression one of quiet shock, but also a deep, sorrowful understanding. She is not triumphant, but grave. Sarah had indeed been asked to wait in an adjoining room, a request from Mr. Abernathy that had puzzled her. Now, witnessing Julian's incandescent fury, a profound sadness washed over her. This wasn't a victory she had sought, nor a battle she had ever wished to fight. Julian turned, his wild eyes fixing on Sarah, who stood motionless, her hands clasped before her. "You," he shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "You conniving witch! How did you do it? What perverse spell did you cast on him?" His accusations grew wilder, more unhinged. "She must have blackmailed him. Threatened him. This is a travesty, a mockery of justice. I am his son. His only son." Mr. Abernathy held up a hand. "Mr. Finch, your father was of sound mind when he drafted and signed this will, and indeed, up until his final days. We have medical attestations to that effect. The will is ironclad. Furthermore," the lawyer continued, his voice firm, "Mr. Finch anticipated your reaction." Julian scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. Anticipated? He couldn't anticipate his next meal without her spoon-feeding him, probably laced with some potion. He paced like a caged animal, his expensive suit suddenly looking ill-fitting on his agitated frame. "I will fight this. I will drag her name through every gutter. I will expose her for the scheming parasite she is. She will not see a penny of my father's money. My money." He punctuated the air with his fist, his carefully constructed composure utterly shattered, revealing the raw, grasping greed beneath. Sarah watched him, her heart heavy. She had seen this venom before, directed at her in smaller doses, but now, amplified by the loss of a fortune, it was a terrifying spectacle. Yet, beneath her shock, a quiet resolve began to form, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She had endured his cruelty in silence for years. She would face this storm too, not for the money, but for the memory of a lonely old man who had, in his own way, seen her. Julian Finch, true to his venomous promise, launched his assault immediately. The tabloids, those vultures of misfortune, were fed a steady diet of salacious lies, painting Sarah as a manipulative seductress, a cunning opportunist who had preyed on a grieving, vulnerable billionaire. Headlines screamed of the maid who stole millions, and Billionaire's senile betrayal. Julian, fueled by a bottomless well of arrogant fury and the sycophantic encouragement of his equally rapacious friends, orchestrated a public crucifixion, believing he could bully and shame Sarah into relinquishing what he considered rightfully his. Visual cue, montage of lurid tabloid covers, Julian giving angry press conferences, Sarah being hounded by paparazzi but maintaining a dignified silence. He filed lawsuits, hired aggressive attorneys, and paraded a series of dubious witnesses who claimed to have seen Sarah's undue influence over the elder Finch. This was Julian's grand, hubristic prank on the universe, his attempt to teach the insignificant maid a lesson, to put her back in her supposed place. But Alastair Finch, a man who had built an empire through shrewd observation and careful planning, had indeed anticipated his son's character. He had seen the darkness in Julian, the avarice, the cruelty, the utter lack of empathy, not just towards Sarah, but towards himself. And he had prepared. In the ensuing legal hearings, as Julian's lawyers presented their flimsy case built on hearsay and slander, Mr. Abernathy calmly, methodically, began to dismantle it. The irrefutable proof Alastair Finch had left behind was not just a single document, but a carefully curated collection of evidence, gathered over years of silent, sorrowful observation. Visual cue, slow-motion reveal of evidence, a locked diary, security footage stills, signed affidavits. First, Mr. Abernathy presented Alastair Finch's personal diaries, written in his own hand, detailing Julian's consistent neglect, his verbal abuse, his demands for money, and his blatant disinterest in his father's well-being. Passages were read aloud, painting a devastating portrait of a son waiting impatiently for his father to die. Julian visited today, one entry read. He did not ask about my health, only about the quarterly dividends. His eyes are like a shark's, cold and empty. Then came the security footage, time-stamped recordings from within the mansion, showing Julian berating staff, including Sarah, with shocking cruelty, and on multiple occasions, screaming at his frail father over financial matters. There was even footage of Julian attempting to have his father's access to his own accounts restricted, arguing with bank officials about Alastair's diminished capacity. And next, affidavits from loyal, long-serving staff members, the cook, the gardener, even Mr. Finch's physician, all attested to Sarah's unwavering kindness, her gentle care for Mr. Finch, and Julian's appalling, often abusive behavior. They spoke of Sarah often being the only one to sit with Mr. Finch, to read to him, to listen, while Julian was conspicuously absent or openly disdainful. The most damning piece of evidence was a video message from Alastair Finch himself, recorded weeks before his death, his voice weak but his mind clearly lucid. Visual cue, close up on the video screen, Alastair Finch speaking directly to the camera, his eyes filled with a weary sadness but also a steely resolve. "If you are watching this," Alastair began, his gaze piercing, "it is likely because my son, Julian, is contesting my final wishes. I am of sound mind, and my decision to leave my estate to Sarah Walker is born not of manipulation, but of profound gratitude and a deep, painful understanding of my son's true nature." He detailed Julian's lifelong pattern of entitlement and cruelty, his lack of character, his inability to love or show compassion. "Sarah," Alastair continued, his voice softening, "showed me more genuine kindness in her years of service than my own son has in his entire lifetime. She asked for nothing. She gave everything. She is a woman of profound integrity and quiet strength. Julian, you were given every advantage, every opportunity. You squandered them all on selfishness and pride. This inheritance is not a punishment, son, it is a consequence. A consequence of your own actions." The courtroom was silent. Julian's face, once crimson with rage, was now ashen, his bravado crumbling. His lawyers looked aghast. His sycophantic friends, who had attended for the spectacle, began to slip away, their faces pale. The public unraveling was complete, his downfall spectacular and self-inflicted. The lawsuits were summarily dismissed. Julian Finch, the arrogant oppressor, was left with nothing but his shattered pride and a reputation irrevocably destroyed. The aftermath of Julian Finch's public disgrace was as swift as it was devastating for him. His name became synonymous with greed and callousness. Business associates distanced themselves, fair-weather friends vanished, and the opulent lifestyle he had taken for granted evaporated like morning mist. Visual cue, symbolic contrast, Julian, once in bespoke suits, now looks disheveled and alone in a modest, stark setting. Simultaneously, Sarah, in simple but elegant attire, is seen decisively signing documents in a bright, airy office. Sarah Walker, however, did not revel in his downfall. There was no triumphant gloating, no vengeful satisfaction. Instead, she met her astounding new reality with the same quiet dignity and profound sense of responsibility that had characterized her life thus far. The weight of Alastair Finch's legacy, and the immense fortune that came with it, settled upon her shoulders not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. Her first act was to ensure that Alastair Finch's memory was honored in a way that reflected his true, often hidden, compassion, rather than the cold facade he often presented to a world that had, in Julian, so bitterly disappointed him. She established the Alastair Finch Foundation for Dignity and Care, its mission to support underpaid and undervalued caregivers, nurses, hospice workers, and domestic staff like herself, and to fund initiatives for compassionate elder care. It was a direct rebuke to Julian's callousness and a testament to the quiet heroism she had witnessed and embodied. Visual cue, Sarah at the opening of a modern, welcoming care facility or shaking hands with scholarship recipients. She moved out of the grand, lonely Finch mansion, finding its opulence overwhelming and its memories too heavy. Instead, she purchased a comfortable but unpretentious home and set about transforming the Finch business empire, not by dismantling it, but by infusing it with a new ethos of ethical practice and social responsibility. She sought out wise advisors, some of whom had been loyal to Alastair and had also witnessed Julian's shortcomings. She listened, she learned, and she led with a quiet, steely determination. She ensured that the long-serving staff of the Finch estate, those who had shown loyalty and kindness, were generously rewarded and secured in their positions. There were no grand pronouncements, no seeking of the limelight she now so easily commanded. Instead, her actions spoke with a powerful eloquence. She invested in communities, supported education for underprivileged youth, and championed causes that Alastair, in his more reflective moments, had once expressed a quiet interest in but had perhaps lacked the will or the right partner to pursue. Julian Finch, stripped of his inheritance and his social standing, faded into obscurity, a bitter, cautionary tale whispered in the circles he once dominated. His attempts to rebuild his life were hampered by the indelible stain of his public humiliation, a direct consequence of his own arrogance and his cruel underestimation of the quiet woman who had served his father. Sarah, on the other hand, flourished, not in the gaudy trappings of wealth, but in the purposeful application of her newfound resources. Her transformation was not from maid to millionaire in the crass sense, but from an underestimated observer to an empowered agent of positive change. Her triumph was not merely financial, it was a profound moral victory, a quiet revolution of values where integrity, compassion, and true worth prevailed over entitlement and prejudice. The world had tried to define her by her apron, by her silence, by her supposed station. But Sarah Walker, with the unexpected, transformative gift from a lonely old man, had redefined herself, and in doing so, offered a powerful lesson to all who had eyes to see. And for those who have followed her journey, who have felt the outrage at injustice and the quiet thrill of its righteous correction, remember that dignity is a power that can never be truly extinguished by arrogance. If you've been moved by Sarah's incredible story of resilience and unexpected triumph, please consider sharing it, for stories like these remind us of the quiet strength that often resides in the most unexpected places, and the profound truth that true wealth is measured not in gold, but in character. What are your thoughts on Alastair's decision? Was it justice, or something more? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that challenge, inspire, and ultimately, uplift the human spirit. For in a world often dominated by the loud and the proud, it is the quiet acts of kindness, the unwavering integrity of the underestimated, that truly shape a better tomorrow, proving that sometimes, the greatest fortunes are not inherited by birth, but earned through the simple, yet profound, currency of a good heart. This was not just Sarah's inheritance, it was the universe balancing its books, a dramatic, cathartic reminder that prejudice is a blindfold, dignity a quiet roar, and underestimation the gravest error of the arrogant. True power lies not in what you possess, but in who you are, and how you choose to lift others, even when you yourself have been kept down.